and welcome back to Hindustan Astrology. I'm Katya, and in today's video, we're going to talk about a very special project to me because this is something that I studied while I was in ethnomusicology here at Indiana University in Bloomington. And they did a wonderful research project on Gennett Records, which is the record company from Richmond, Indiana, that recorded the sounds of the United States in the 20s and part of the 30s. And it's absolutely fascinating because so many artists from today that are influential in all sorts of music reference the artists that came from Gennett Records, such as Jelly Roll Morton and Louis Armstrong and Hoagy Carmichael. All of these people were recorded by Gennett Records. And I found it was interesting to see how the chart of this company coincided with the United States birth chart. And it's just uncanny because it seems like the fate and destiny of both entities are interwoven. So to discuss this today, I've invited back my mentor, Dr. Santhip Kanholy. Thank you so much for joining me.
Namaste to everyone. Thank you, Katya, for inviting me. This will be an interesting study to discuss, actually.
Thank you, Santhip ji. Yeah, it's when I first saw this documentary, I mean, my jaw just hit the floor. I just couldn't believe all of the musicians that were in it, and that first of all, that my department at IU was in charge of this project. I was so proud. But then also that Richmond was involved. Now, Richmond, Indiana is kind of run down now. And back in the 10s and 20s last century, it had, what did they say, the largest amount of millionaires per capita square mile in the city. And it was hopping, it was, the place to be. And now you would never think that, but we actually, my husband and I are in the business of flipping houses. And so we actually own a house there. And so we went they have the Firehouse Blues barbecue place. And we went there and they have pictures of all the musicians from Robert Plant to Bob Dylan, and all of these famous jazz and blues musicians that are quoted, saying, I wouldn't have been anywhere without these recordings, like the music we have today would not exist without this record label. So let's take a look at what Gennett Records is and its influence on today. We have Gennett Records and the Evolution and Innovation of American Music. Vedic Sidereal Astrology Interpretation by myself, Catherine Faris-Strom, and I'm dedicating to my mother, Rebecca Lee Walker. She passed away in 2017, and she was a jazz musician. So I know she would absolutely love this research. So let's take a look at a brief history of Gennett Records and the Star Piano Company.
During the 1920s, a parade of unknown blues, jazz, and country western musicians found their way to this small Indiana town of Richmond, population 25,000. These fabulous musicians came here. This is what's left of the once great Star Piano Factory complex. It was owned by the Jeannette family. They had stores all over the United States. In 1916, they decided to expand the operation, get into phonograph. In 1917, they opened their own record label, and Gennett Records was suddenly a major presence in the recording industry. And in 1921, opened their second recording studio right here in Richmond, Indiana. It was situated right next to the Whitewater River, which you see in the background. It was an unusual setting for recording. It was a primitive studio where the recording sessions were often interrupted by the passing trains through the Star Valley. It was rushing down to downtown Richmond. And it operated just as America was finding its musical voice, a voice defined in no small part by the very pioneers who recorded here. Musicians like Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, Dick Spiderbeck, Gene Autry, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Hoagie Carmichael, and Scrapper Blackwell, whose music you hear in the background. What led these great musicians to record in Richmond, Indiana, as opposed to Chicago or New York City? Finding those answers led me to write this book, Jelly Roll, Bix, and Hoagie, The Story of Gennett Records, which was published by Indiana University Press in 1994. Now, these several years later, we have now moved on, and we've revised this edition with a new version of Jelly Roll, Bix, and Hoagie. Thank you to my friends at Indiana University Press. To talk about this book, though, we felt that it was more useful to come to Richmond, Indiana, where all this history unfolds. We're standing in front of the spectacular Jeannette Mansion. It was built during the turn of the century by Henry Jeannette, who founded the great Gennett Records label. I'm standing in front of the old Pennsylvania Railroad station in Richmond, and this is how these great musicians got to this town. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and King Oliver, and from this station, they could walk to the Jeannette recording studio. Sadly, the great Gennett Records label closed during the height of the Great Depression. And 20 years later, Star Piano followed suit. And for several decades, the great Gennett Records label was pretty much neglected in its own hometown of Richmond. In the last 20 years, that has changed through the Star Jeannette Foundation, which has embraced the history, turned this whole area into a beautiful park, and created this wonderful Walk of Fame, which celebrates all the great artists for the Gennett Records label. Gennett Records is also celebrated in Richmond through its beautiful murals, like this one of Dick Spiderbeck. And this one at the Firehouse Barbecue of Blind Lemon Jefferson. And of course, the great Lonnie Johnson. And as they say, you heard it here first in Richmond. Pam Bliss painted Charlie Patton here, and Pam Bliss painted Charlie Patton here. What's the deal? You're probably thinking, this is great history, but how is this relevant to me today? Well, the fact is that Gennett Records have never sounded better and have never been more accessible. Allow me to explain. When the records first came out, they were issued on 78s in the 1920s and 1930s. But by the 1950s and 60s and 70s, Gennett Records were showing up on LP compilations, like this one by the Wolverines. Enter the 1980s, and any number of CD recordings featured Gennett artists recorded here in Richmond. And that continues to this day. We're now in the internet age, with the capability of just your cell phone. You can go out and order hundreds and hundreds of Gennett recordings through iTunes and other sources, which makes this music a wonderful experience for people in the 21st century. It's my hope that this presentation will inspire you to search deeper into the history of Gennett Records. It's equally important, just enjoy the music.
I'll be so glad when my train pulls up.
Yeah, those Star pianos are worth a lot today. My husband actually inherited one and he accidentally sold it for he gave it to a church. And now that piano is worth $200,000. So Star pianos are, it's like history, right? It's not just, a piano. So here, just to refresh our memories, and for new people too, this is the US birth chart. Now we're using the sidereal positions, and I'm using the time that James Kelleher recorded in his research, which is July 4th, 1776 at 6:30 p.m. in Philadelphia. So we see here our ascendant is in Sagittarius, Mula Nakshatra, Sag. is ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter is the chart ruler, which is in opposition in the 7th house. And Mula Nakshatra is ruled by Ketu, and Ketu is in the 2nd house with Pluto. We're currently having a Pluto return. And our moon is in Shatabishak, Aquarius. And our Mercury's retrograde, which is very interesting. And then you'll find with, well, anyway, just pay attention to Rahu in Pushya and Ketu in Shravana when we look at Gennett Records. Santhip, is there anything you want to say that, like, you know, to you, what is this chart? Like, what is the purpose, you know, the destiny?
Well, it's a very important thing to analyze, especially the birth chart of a country and so forth. So, like, the point I want to again highlight here is that when you find a very historically significant events, usually you find the chart of the event or the decisions or chart of the company, for instance, is directly influencing the country's birth chart. So that's one. It's a very simple thing. So how can you use this even positively? Like, for instance, if you wanted to create a company that is going to be a big hit in the US or something, then that's when you make these research kind of thing. So you need to find out what the US birth chart is. You need to find all that. So it's interesting. Of course, right now you can see US did have challenges last year, the lockdown and all that. The eclipse did happen last year in July, so all that would play out. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing to see how Gennett Records is going to fit in with the US chart on that context.
Well, I've looked at this chart a million times, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many times have we looked at the US chart, right? But
yeah,
I don't think I really grasped the Rahu position until I looked at the Gennett Records chart, because Rahu is your fate, it's your destiny, it's what you're here to do. It's in Pushya. It's in the 8th house.
Right.
Pushya is about nurturing and teaching as well. I mean, it's the very traditional, schoolmaster kind of teacher. And Mercury retrograde's there. It's like we were discussing before, it's not always a bad thing. It just emphasizes that planet. And the 8th house is all about transformation. And so it almost seems like this chart is telling us that the transformation that needs to happen in this chart, in this country, is through the 8th house with Mercury, which is media and communications, and nurturing people, right?
Yes.
And what's opposite? Ketu's in Shravana, which is the star of listening
Right.
to music, to what's in opposition, Mercury retrograde. Sorry, we left a window open upstairs and now all these flies and stuff came in. So if you see me swatting at things, it's because there's bugs that are flying around. But I didn't really uncover that until I looked at the Gennett Records chart. So let's take a look at that. And here we have. Now, I came up with this time just by looking at the dashas. And something that Joni always says is that, the dasha doesn't start when an event happens. Usually the event happens 3 to 4 months prior, and then the dasha cycle starts, or the bhukti, and so when I looked at the planetary cycles, it seemed like 6 p.m. on this day, which is June 12th of 1915. And this seemed to be, it seemed to fit. And so this was their first decision to start the record company. And the moon prior had been exalted in Taurus. But when Moon went into Gemini, things seemed to line up. And so here you see, in the last one, we had Rahu and Pushya. So there's a Rahu Ketu inversion between the two charts, which shows an interweaving of fate and destiny. And then, their Rahu is in Dhanishta, which is the nakshatra of the musician. And so it's like the fate and destiny of this company. And the third house is medium communication. And Uranus retrograde in Shravana. I mean, that just shows the electrical capacity, because you have to realize in 1915, they only had electricity for about 20 years at that time. I think it was about 1895 when it became almost, common for, people to be able to have it. So not everyone had electricity at that time. So the fact that they were, burning these records on wax, and they had to have the room temperature super hot so that when they made the master copy and the needle, so that the needle could, go into the wax, had to be super hot in the room. And so I think you kind of see that here with this, the electrical, kind of an inventive, they were one of the first companies at the time. Venus in her own sign. I think that's very significant. They made a lot of money with these records. Jupiter and Pisces, in the fifth house of creativity. I mean, to me, that just speaks of music. And then K2 Neptune. I mean, it's like an extremely spiritual combination. And then back to this idea of pushya, nurturing isn't just food or, for a child, milk. Nurturing can come in the form of music as well and creativity. And so that's seen here. But, this is the elephant in the room, right? All of this stuff in Gemini, and that's just like the US birth chart. So what do you think about this?
Well, of course, we are talking about a record company, so the Venus has to be strong. So in this chart, you see Venus is in the 7th house, Venus is aspecting the ascendant. So it is a very strong Venus, Of course, that is very important fact. The house of creativity, Jupiter is also very strong, with Jupiter being the 5th lord. Rahu is in Dhanishta, the nakshatra level, you can see a destiny around music being activated. Now, what is interesting, if you carefully look at the other planets, like you can see Venus degrees, for instance. Venus is very close to the degree where Moon gets exalted. Moon is getting exalted at 3 degrees of Taurus. So immediately, and that is the 9th lord of the chart. So you can see there is a fortune here, there is a purpose here, destiny here, that kind of thing in music. Immediately you can see that. Not only that, the ascendant lord Mars is in Barney, which is, if you carefully look at that, that is a degree, exactly the degree where Saturn gets debilitated. So you can see there is a service of protection, service of like security, that kind of thing can be seen. And also to add on to the point where Neptune is in Pushya, Pushya is also the, the nakshatra associated with hosting. You host events. So you host spiritual events, you host a teacher. Used to be, if you are continuing with a spiritual teacher, you had to host him in your home and stuff like that. So you can see that Neptune being in Pushya, they were driven by the idea of hosting idealistic events or, idealistic personalities and so forth, which is controlled Neptune anyways. So you can see that kind of karma here in the chart also. So very important chart also. Sun being a Mrigashira. Mrigashira is also having a musical quality to it. It is with Venus also. So that's a very important thing. So they did eventually become famous. They did have historical value. And you see that again with Venus being in Taurus, the sign of history also. So one of those very important things as well. So yeah, definitely all those are great points. And as you correctly said, Saturn Mercury was in Ardra Nakshatra. So definitely the Gemini, there is a karma transforming the media, transforming the communication of that era. Now Ardra Nakshatra is also very intense kind of energy, which also played out for them, which we'll see also.
Yeah, Ardra is the teardrop, and it's tragedy, but it's the storm that needs to happen so that we can have a new dawn. And you notice that Saturn's at 11:11. I mean, that's kind of weird, right? Saturn, is a dark planet. He rules the working class. He rules Black and brown people. Pluto as well. And then Mercury, who is, the scribe, right? So all of this is showing this transformation that's happening through people in society who, you know, are, you know, the working class who are, he's giving them a voice, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then also, you know, the sixth house is service, like you said, and having Mars there, exalted in Aries. I'm not exalted, I'm sorry, he's exalted in Capricorn, but his Mula Tricona sign of Aries.
That's right.
And Barney is about birthing a new reality.
That's correct.
And so
Yes.
this whole chart is about, you know, the pain, the difficulty. And yes, there's teardrops and tragedy, but it's all about birthing a new reality.
Right.
And it just, you know, when I saw this and looked at the US chart, I went, oh my gosh. So what made me decide this was, so this is the day that it happened, right? It was Mars Mercury. We know that, you know, Mars is the chart ruler and it's Mula Tricona sign, and Mercury's important because it's conjunct all those planets like we talked about. And then this important event that came up that we're going to discuss happened here, like right when Rahu Saturn started. And, you know, Rahu is in Dhanishta, the nakshatra, the musician, and then Saturn is, like we said, in Ardra at 11:11. So when those two planets got activated, this very important event happened. So that was the decision that I made to choose 6 p.m. as the birth time for this chart. You know, it could have been at 6:30, but I'm not using the Vargas. So I don't want to, you know, misstep. And so here we are again, and just having them side by side. Okay. So you can just see, there we go, how these line up, right? And just look at the degrees. Mars is almost exactly conjunct the moon here. That shows great wealth, especially, you know, for Gennett Records, it's about other people's money. In the United States, it's about forming a company. Venus is at 12:26. Saturn is here. So this is like, you know, Pluto, Saturn, almost exactly conjunct Venus. One thing I've learned about Venus conjunct Pluto is that it can show betrayal. And certainly eventually people did betray Gennett Records and they let it fall into, you know, disarray and, you know, because of the Great Depression. So definitely there, you could see some eventual betrayal and heartbreak there. Jupiter degree is almost exactly conjunct Mercury. Well, that's just the whole musician thing, right? Just expanding that voice. And then the sun has the highest degree. So that's just shining a flashlight onto all of this. And what I was saying before, it's like, it's almost like the United States, like God put us together here in this particular configuration with these particular dramas so that we could just be, the frequencies could be wrung out of us and squeezed out of us, you know, to make this music. Because if there's anything the United States has given to this world, it's film and the music industry. And I think that it can really be seen through this company. So now let's talk about the birth of jazz. Gennett Records, Louis Armstrong, and the birth of jazz.
By April 1923, King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band was the most popular act in Chicago. The long lines that wrapped around the club each night captured the attention of the Jeannette studios.
They then encouraged the band. They said, hey, do you want to come make a record in Richmond? And they did. People didn't see this so much as a way to make a lot of money, but it was exciting. It was new technology. It was getting your music out in a way that kind of immortalized your sound.
Over a 2-day period on April 5th and 6th, 1923, King Oliver and his talented second cornet player, Louis Armstrong, would be recorded and distributed around the world, featuring Armstrong's first solo on the song, Chimes Blues.
It's been described as almost like hearing the birth of the creation of jazz when you hear the original Chimes Blues on Jeannette. You were going to hear the sound that defined the 1920s. When Louis Armstrong gets in front of that recording horn, there's a whole new sound to jazz.
Louis Armstrong, for some reason, his sound has a spiritual essence in it that anything on the recording, when his sound touched it, it was sympathetic. It went through that recording and it could go right through you and touch you with the emotion and intensity he had. That is a mystery. No one knows why.
During the King Oliver recording sessions, the engineers at Jeannette had a particular challenge with the strength of Armstrong's performance.
Louis Armstrong's sound was so powerful. It kind of overpowered the rest of the band. And there's always a concern if it's too loud, going through the horn, it can create a vibration and it actually caused the needle to skip on the blank wax.
Can you imagine? So Louis Armstrong, you know, and his mentor, King Oliver from New Orleans, really set the stage for jazz as we know it today. So let's just listen to a little bit of this song a little bit more. So do you hear what he's talking about? How when Louis started playing, he kind of took over. So what is that? That's Surya. That's the sun. That's somebody who has a really powerful sun who, when he walks in the room, he's a king, right?
Right.
So let's take a look at his birth chart and figure out what's going on with this dude. Okay, so there's the, where am I going to put this? I'm going to collapse this like that. Okay. So here we have the birth chart of Louis Armstrong. Now, he was, you know, essentially he was born in a whorehouse in New Orleans. So the birth time, you know, may or may not be exactly accurate, but this is what was on the Astro Data Bank. So, you know, we're just going to use it with a grain of salt. But look at this Mercury retrograde. Isn't that interesting? And there's the sun and there's Rahu. So all in Swati, right? The goddess Saraswati, you know, who rules music and the intellect, and it's in his fourth house of the mother. Isn't that interesting? Well, Rahu's in Vishaka, the victorious one. And I found Vishaka has a really hard edge to them. You know, they kind of are like the goth rock and roll people. You know, there's a kind of a darkness to them, but yet they're very, you know, embody Venus, you know, in their style and their presentation, but there's like a darkness to them, right? And he just took over. And whatever recording he was on, he took over. And so where's Venus? Venus is over here with Jupiter and Saturn. I mean, you know, I think that Saturn probably brought a lot of stability to his music playing. In the sixth house of work and service, he probably was a really hard worker. And then Moon and Maga, you know, he's the king. So what do you think about his chart?
Well, yeah, definitely. As you correctly pointed out, he did have a strong presence when he entered. You could see that with Sun and Libra with Swati and all that. Definitely, no doubt about that. Also, Moon and Maga also usually are very gifted from their past lives with abilities. So you could see that also. We carefully look at the Ketu in the chart. You can see Ketu is in Burni also, which is also a Venus nakshatra. And not only that, he has Jupiter in Purvashada along with Saturn also in Purvashada, which is another Venus rule nakshatra. So he did have some big karma, bringing new ways of thinking as far as music is concerned. New energies of music definitely had to play out. And of course, Venus itself is going into Mula nakshatra ruled by Ketu, which is like a fresh start, a fresh new world, entry to a new paradigm of sorts. Definitely, so that did play out for him very strongly. So you could see that, and there is a very sukshma exchange. There is an exchange between Venus and Ketu in the chart, which is also very good. Venus is in Ketu rule nakshatra, Ketu is in Venus rule nakshatra, which is also bringing this new birth kind of process as far as music is concerned.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, in the house of his career also, actually. That's correct. So you could see that. Definitely, what is also interesting is Mars is also in Jyeshta nakshatra, which is also the king of. There is a royalty quality to Jyeshta also. Usually, the king of the Devas, Indra, is a ruler there. So you can see that quality being coming up for Louis Armstrong as well. Yeah, definitely. So all those points to a very talented person, someone with great determination, great drive to become the best in his field, and to bring in new birth of an entirely new musical energy to this world and all that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And notice that both charts have Neptune retrograde. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just
So I think the chart on the right is the day when chimes blows recorded.
Yeah,
is that
this
right?
is the chimes blues chart. And
right.
So this just, it's just interesting how his chart matches up so well with this one.
Right. You can see definitely his on the day when that was happening, the transits of the day, the Rahu was interacting with his moon, which is a very important interaction. And you can also see Mars is actually going into his 11th house also of Kritika, and it's aspecting his natal Mars. Jupiter is over his Rahu as well. So that's a very important time period. The transiting Jupiter is in Libra, which is over his Rahu. That's a very, very important time period also. Important instances and so forth. And so that Jupiter over Rahu, you are guided towards creating something that will last for multiple generations of sorts. So that's something you can see. So that did play out. And of course, it is going through third house from the moon. You can say that that's usually someone who is, they did a lot of creativity. Third house also the house of performing arts, as you would call it. So he did have to perform something legendary, right? So something very important as far as the life story is concerned. So you could see all that, definitely.
Yeah. And his Saturn is aspecting Saturn retrograde in this chart.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so
the Saturn is aspecting them. So
he's a hard worker,
that.
I mean,
yeah, definitely.
Regardless of whatever you want to think about, his, lifestyle or whatever, this man was a hard worker, and his work, his sixth house activated the third house in this chart of medium communication. So, I mean, this was, this was the birth of jazz. And what was jazz? It was something that was new and innovative. So really, we need to look at Uranus. And Uranus is here with Mars, the elder, in the fifth house of creativity for him. And then it conjuncts the moon in this chart also of creativity. I mean, it's just, they both have the same ascendant, different nakshatra, but still, that house is activated. And it's like, you can't make this stuff up, it just, it flows so easily. Now, at this time, I want to show a clip. It's a little bit long. It's the longest we're going to watch, but it's very important for people to understand the context in history of what racism was like at that time in Indiana, and how it impacted the birth of jazz and all of these different musics, and what these musicians, had to go through in order to create this so that we could all, have this culture today. And so let's take a look at this.
When we think of the Ku Klux Klan and its resurgence in the 1920s, everyone thinks of Mississippi and Tennessee. They think of Georgia, but the biggest resurgence in Klan activity was in Indiana.
The early 1920s was a time in which America witnessed a great shift in population and cultural norms, fueled by a combination of the Great Migration, which saw thousands of new African Americans moving into northern cities, along with the surge of immigrants coming from Europe, escaping the devastation of their homelands right after World War I.
The elements were there that allowed them to believe in nativist thought and to believe that there needed to be some kind of organized effort to withstand what they felt as an incursion into the community, that they're going to be there and to be controlled and be regulated.
Some in the state searched to find a group of people willing to try to control and regulate social forces from what they perceived to be outsiders. For many, their answer was the Ku Klux Klan, an organization that was originally formed in the South in the 1860s, but saw a sudden resurgence right after the First World War. The Klan's primary targets, African Americans, Catholics, and Jews, were groups they thought threatened the way of life of many Protestant Americans in the region.
There's a reason why the Klan symbols in the 1920s are the American flag and the Christian cross. I mean, it's making a very specific symbolic play to core ideas about what it means to be both American and Christian. That moves beyond simply straightforward racism to include anti-Semitism, anti-Catholicism, and nativism. These isms become part and parcel with the Klan in the 20th century.
Several Klan rallies around Indiana attracted tens of thousands of members and attendees. Richard Jeannette, one of Fred Jeannette's sons, recalled sitting on his grandfather Henry's front porch one day and watching a Klan parade marching down Main Street during the early 1920s.
Richmond at that time, you had a very, very large population of Klan members. There was a large population of Klan members that worked in the Star Piano Company.
As Italian immigrants, the Jeannette family was not sympathetic to the cause of the Klan. Still, the Star Piano Factory employed dozens of Klan members in the plant, and Jeannette agreed to record dozens of Klan records during the decade.
They paid cash on the barrelhead, they paid up front, they pressed a lot of records. These records never appeared in the Jeannette catalog. These records were never in any of their marketing materials.
The Klan records pressed by Jeannette never included the Jeannette logo on them. Most were simply inscribed with Klan logos, such as 100% Americans and others. Most of their music were spin-offs of standard Christian hymns with altered lyrics, such as Onward Christian Klansmen. Still others were Klan originals. According to one story, Clarence Jeannette, Henry's second oldest son, grew upset when he heard that a pirated Klan record was making its way around the manufacturing floor. Clarence demanded that the record be destroyed immediately and that no others be allowed to be distributed throughout the company.
The Klan was fighting against, purportedly, a loss of values. And one of their examples was this sinful jazz music. It just inspires you, it gets in your bones or gets in your soul somewhere, and it's like a demon, and it just possesses you, and now you're dancing wildly. You don't want to do it, because clearly in your right mind you wouldn't do it, and you're now making a fool of yourself. That's what they believe.
By 1925, the beginning of the end was near for the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana. Indiana Grand Dragon D.C. Stevenson was arrested and found guilty for the murder of a young secretary he had raped. and financial scandals eventually destroyed the political careers of Indiana Governor Ed Jackson, as well as the mayor of Indianapolis, both of whom were backed by the Klan. By 1926, the Klan had crumbled and essentially fallen apart in the state, at the same time that Jeannette was in the midst of recording and distributing many of the boldest and most influential jazz recordings in American history.
The whole melting pot metaphor is right there to see in what Jeannette records as music, from jazz and African-American music, blues and jazz, the bluegrass and sort of hillbilly rock of the Appalachian Mountains. You really do get a sense from the musical catalog that comes out of Jeannette of this kind of broad melting pot metaphor that's so central to how we think about the nation's formation. Jeannette is a really important story about how Americans come to understand who we are as a people.
On January 1st, 1913, the New Orleans Times-Picayune reported the arrest of a 12-year-old who had fired a pistol into the air in a New Year's Eve celebration. The youngster was Louis Armstrong, the son of a prostitute and a father who abandoned the family shortly after his birth.
Louis Armstrong grew up in a field that was so violent and so corrupt that it was known as the battlefield. He is surrounded by an area where people are being knifed in clubs.
After the incident with the pistol, the authorities sent Armstrong to the Colored Wave Song. Known in the neighborhood as Little Louis, he joined the marching band. He played the cornet, the same instrument played by his idol in the Storyville club scene, Joe King Oliver.
The youth learn from the mentor by emulation and apprenticeship. And Armstrong, like everybody that came before him and after him, learned by finding a mentor and being an apprentice, learning everything that he could from that person.
When the government shut down the Storyville district at the start of World War I, Oliver left New Orleans to tour several American cities, ultimately landing in Chicago. There he played at the Lincoln Gardens, a club with ties to city gangsters, where he put together a band of many top talents.
This is the greatest assemblage of musicians in the history of music up until that point.
Individuals will always stand out, but the achievement of that style is how they play together and how it is a kind of amalgam of a ragtime style, a blues style, all those things meet at a crossroads of their way of playing and how they fulfill the requirements of all of those styles in a virtuosic manner.
In 1922, Armstrong received a note from Oliver, the man he affectionately called Papa Joe, asking him to come to Chicago and play in the band. Armstrong was so young and naive, he knew of no other life than in New Orleans. As he boarded the train, he wore an old, threadbare tuxedo jacket, the nicest piece of clothing he owned. His mother packed him a sandwich to eat on the train and told him to be sure to wear his long underwear because she had heard that up north, even in the summer, it was always cold.
Louis Armstrong, by this point, had a big reputation in New Orleans. He always said he was not going to leave New Orleans until he got a call from Mr. Oliver. He comes up to Chicago, and he walks into the Lincoln Gardens, and of course he's a total rube. He's a hell of a player, but he's wearing a funeral director's jack coat, and his hair is sort of parted in the middle, and he's a country boy. And these personalities, they were good enough. When they come together, they create a sound where very often you're not even thinking about the component parts. They could do things that were magical. Louis Armstrong was considerably louder than everyone else, and most importantly, his tone was clearer than everyone else. So they positioned him further back in the studio. As a metaphor, this is the great, origin story, because it's basically saying that Armstrong already is alien. He's so modern, he's so new, and also that his brilliance is just, it literally is going to dwarf everything that preceded him. That is one of the greatest assemblages of musicians at the top of their game, in the prime of their career, doing something new, doing something different. It's perfection.
Fred Jeannette was impressed by the massive popularity of his newest recording find and immediately booked a second session for King Oliver's band to record in Richmond that fall.
October 5th of 1923. The King Oliver Band returns from Chicago for its second recording session in Richmond on the very day that you had one of the largest Klan rallies in the region occur in Richmond. And they marched down Main Street and were no more than a mile away from the recording studio on this very same day that you have these beautiful recordings to be made by an African-American band.
To come down to Richmond, Indiana, which again, highly segregated and racialized environment, but they were able to transcend that. It's a consciousness that allows one, that actually demands and requires one to transcend fear. You know, and so I think when you listen to that recording, you got to listen to it with that type of ear of the experience that undergirds what they had to go through.
The King Oliver sessions at Jeannette produced 14 sides of the most memorable music in early jazz history.
You feel like somebody has opened a window and the future is shining in here. The Oliver recordings definitely moved the needle for jazz because it introduces Armstrong, whose presence you cannot miss. It's suggesting where the future is going to be. So it's all happening on these early recordings.
Okay, so wow, you know, that's when I first watched this, I mean, my jaw was just kind of like, I mean, how does anybody, you know, stand still, let alone play music, knowing that there's a Klan rally less than a mile away and they could very easily take over the studio and you'd be gone, you know, like transcending fear, that's Pluto. And if you notice the day that this all happened, which is October 5th of 1923, Pluto was in Ardra, activating all that stuff in the US chart in Ardra and in the Gennett Records chart. The Saturn at 11:11, yeah, that's getting activated that day. And then in his chart, his Neptune retrograde in Ardra. In the 12th house, you know, of secret enemies. So, and also notice that day Mercury was retrograde as well. I mean, we just see this theme of Mercury retrograde throughout this, and I think that's really interesting. But that day, see, Moon was in Ashlesha. Well, Ashlesha is the poison, right? It's the poison of the snake that either kills you or it transcends you. You know, you're either healed or you're dead. And it's conjunct Neptune, which is a higher octave of Venus and indicates music. But I mean, all of this stuff in the 6th house of, open enemies that day. You know, to me, it's just a testament to the strength of him, but, you know, just how grateful we should be to have received this music and received this legacy, because not many people could have done that. Excuse me. So Santhip, what do you think about this chart?
Well, yeah, definitely. You could see some very interesting things there. First of all, you could see on the day when the march was happening, Rahu was transiting over Louis Armstrong's moon. You know, so you could see how he was threatened. You know, during that time period, Rahu and Mars both. So that's one aspect there. Of course, he's also having Jupiter transiting over his Rahu, which is very important, like I mentioned before. Whenever that transit happens, it's always important. And what is interesting further is that, on that particular day, you also find, let's see, not only is this, is the moon, you could say, in the 12th house, the transiting moon is in Ashlesha, which was a very challenging day in terms of dealing with the poisonous emotions and so forth also. But it was actually forming, there are some very interesting yogas just in this chart. Like for instance, you see this Gajkesari yoga being formed with the moon and Jupiter, that day is auspicious. That's something you can say just because of that. That is one aspect there.
Oh,
and
sorry.
Yeah. Then I also wanted to add that, as you correctly said, there was this marching karma there, but it was interesting. Like, so Vishaka is the triumphal arch, right? So one of the things that happens if you have a triumphal arch is that you march your soldiers to show your triumph. You can see that on that particular day, there's Jupiter in Vishaka. There's a very good chance that march did happen. There is a march kind of karma there. You could see that. That is Jupiter is in the 7th house and so forth. Venus is getting debilitated there and so forth. But the good thing is that because perhaps, in my opinion, because Jupiter was involved with Louis Armstrong, with Sun, Rahu, Mercury, and all those important planets, he felt protected. He was like, there was a luck factor more for him. Jupiter is a planet that will always give you grace and luck and fortune. Of course, it will protect you also at the same time. They say that when the drishti of Guru can protect you from any of the challenging things in astrology. So we are beginning to see that aspect. Of course, as you mentioned, the Pluto aspect is also very interesting because Pluto is interacting with Louis Armstrong's Neptune for sure. And not only that, the Uranus is actually aspecting his moon from the 7th house. So for Uranus is retrograde in the chart with Ketu also, which is also getting involved with the Rahu Ketu axis. So that's the other aspect of this new ideas, new creativity, things like that are also coming onto his performance. Now, very important thing also I must add is that of moon in Ashlesha becomes it's called as the coronation, the Abhisheka Nakshatra for the moon in Maga. The nakshatra just immediately a moon becomes a very coronation nakshatra. That nakshatra can make you king of sorts. We find that particular aspect being activated here also. Moon in Maga will have the nakshatra before it, which is Ashlesha, as the coronation nakshatra, which is the Abhisheka nakshatra. So literally that's what happened. On that day he literally became king of sorts. So it was very interesting. Of course, it was a tense time period with Mars, Rahu, and so forth. But then I think once the music started, it just took over. There was something deeper happening in that point with that aspect also.
Yeah, definitely. And that day, Ketu is in Shatabishak, which is the 100 healers, and helps to heal hard to cure addictions. And racism is a very hard addiction, I think.
Yeah.
It's the insidious one, right? Because it's not a pill you're taking or a drink or anything like that. It's an idea. But racism is like, the worst virus that's taking over the whole planet.
Right, yeah.
This is what I keep telling people. I'm like, look, I'm sorry, but the whole world is racist. We have grown up, every single culture has grown up with prejudice against another culture. The whole world is racist. But the United States, we've inherited all of the racism from other cultures, and it's up to us to break it. It's up to us to talk about it, because the way we're talking about racism can't be talked about in a lot of countries across the world. They just take it as, it's a part of life, or, it's part of society or whatever. Shouldn't be talked about, right? But we have to talk about these things if we're going to change them. And so that's why I think it's up to the United States to be the ones to help break the pattern. And it might seem like all of this crazy racism is going on here, which it is, but we're the ones exposing it. Whereas you're not going to get this exposed in other countries, which I will not name. But we're the ones to break the pattern. And so I think part of breaking this pattern is through the music industry and how it affects people.
Yeah, definitely. Music has no caste, creed, or gender, right? So music is music. So it's like it is something beyond. There's an energetic thing also to it. No doubt about that. But yeah, but it is true. Music has a society, transcending theme to it. So the social qualities of the day are no longer important in music. If you produce good music, that's it. You're good, right? So it is very important for sure. But yeah, we could see how Louis Armstrong was part of that discussion, with his Rahu being in a Libra, which is a sign ruled by Venus. And Venus is in Mula Nakshatra also. Yet he was a leader amongst them also. He had to set an example to many people of his generation also to put this point across of music transcending boundaries and so forth. And that's exactly what you can see in his chart, with Venus being with Jupiter and Saturn and so forth. Now, of course, Jupiter and Saturn are in Purvashada Nakshatra, which is a battle nakshatra. He had his own struggles, no doubt about that. So it is a battle nakshatra. It's a war. His music literally got associated with war. You can't get more Purvashada than that. So definitely but that's the thing though. So when you might be doing music in a studio, but there might be war outside. That was Louis Armstrong's karma. That's exactly what happened with Venus in Molo and Saturn and Jupiter in Purvashada actually. So that is also one more thing that definitely did get activated. It was a very important day, though. It was a very important day for music in general, because Venus is actually, you could say, Venus is getting debilitated in Virgo on that day, but then Mercury is retrograde in the chart, and that is cancelling the debilitation of Venus also at the same time. So it's like a niche banga kind of thing happening there. The debilitation is being cancelled with Venus and Mercury there. Of course, there is Saturn and Sun and all that. Now that's a different factor, but that at least that Venus is feeling supported by Mercury is one important thing to recognize also. So Saturn Sun shows that there is a karma disrespect kind of thing and all that, but then you had Venus and Mercury, which was also helping the music on that day. That is also one good thing. Yeah, but definitely Ashlesha Nakshatra day is a day when the masses can easily get angry and so forth. Is exactly what happened on that day also.
And one thing, I have a client who has this. I just read a chart last week of somebody who has Venus debilitated, but Mercury exalted in Virgo, Nichabanga Raja Yoga, right? Well, she's severely dyslexic. And so there, even though my personal experience is that I don't think anything is 100% canceled. It's still there.
Yeah.
It's still debilitated. It's just getting help, right? Mercury's exalted because he's retrograde, but the fact that I know somebody who's severely dyslexic tells me that this has a delaying quality to it, especially with Saturn there. So the effects of this combination are going to be delayed into the future. And
that's right.
That's why I think this was so important, is because this laid the groundwork for so much other music that followed it. Like I was saying, Robert Plant and Bob Dylan and all of these famous, rock musicians, they give so much credit to the musicians that came out of this era. And that's I think the delaying, dyslexic quality of this combination here.
Yeah, definitely you can see Jupiter being in Vishaka also. And Venus is in Chitra with Saturn. Usually the music will have its purpose fulfilled in the future, is what you see with the Saturn Venus in Chitra. No doubt Venus in Chitra is having its own cold bringing effect. The cold that will be enjoyed in future. That is what is a symbol of Chitra Nakshatra, is the pole. The pole is formed by irritation also at the same time, right? So the voice that gets irritated, that becomes a pole in the long term. So it is true. That's exactly what happened also. But and you can see some very important things here also. One is that from an astrological perspective, you can see the nakshatra lord of Rahu is also Venus, which is a Purvashada nakshatra. On that day, there was a performance, but it is accompanied with Mars, which shows there was a challenge associated with that performance. But then Venus being with Saturn, and it is a malefic hemming of sorts. Venus is between the degrees of Sun and Saturn there, so it has its own challenges there. So, but then Mercury is there, just helping the Venus and so forth. So the musicians did know that they were going to a place where there was challenges there. That was expected, but they did because of the other support. Like I said, Jupiter is very important in Kendra here. Moon is in Kendra to Jupiter, coming up, especially Rajoga. They were inspired by what they could do. And they knew that doing that with the music, they will be able to create a bigger impact. That's when they had to speak the loudest with their music, actually. So that's what actually happened. It was good. Yeah, it's very good, actually. You could see it's very interesting. So this kind of analysis is what actually tells you a story of sorts, a story of an era and so forth. You can begin to see what was actually going on in that era. Usually they say that nowadays we don't appreciate the value of history until we lose it, right? Until we begin to face the same situations again in a different kind of thing going on. So it is one of those things, So when you begin to understand the struggles which historically many people had to face, and your own struggles begin to make more sense in that context.
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. And that was why I wanted to show this to people, is because I don't think they realize the hardships that these musicians went through to give us the music that we have today. I don't think we appreciate or realize what was really going on at that time. And if they hadn't recorded this stuff, it probably wouldn't have been recorded by anybody else. And it would have been lost to history. And this is the seed. This is the seed of the whole American music industry right here.
Yeah. That's a very interesting thing. Like, again, there are some more hidden things here. Like I said, if you look at that, one hidden thing here is to try to see. There are astrologers out there who look at the birth chart of a country and then see how your chart is dealing well with one country or not. So that's an actual technique, which is what we did. So that's a very valuable thing. And also, we looked at how certain artists were fitting with the destiny of the country, and even how certain events could also be seen with the artist chart. All that is very, very valuable. We also looked at the impact of a company upon a country also, right? You could also see that. So, I mean, there are very, very strong clues there also. So hopefully the viewers do get to appreciate that. There's a lot of work that has gone into this presentation, but I can definitely encourage, this kind of thinking this kind of studies also need to come up more in astrology, this kind of interdisciplinary kind of studies and so forth. We're trying to combine multiple themes, trying to say a story, trying to use astrological tools to understand the consciousness of that era and so forth. But the challenges that they had to go through also. So it's great work, Katya. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, and we're in the US, we're in a Pluto return right now. Pluto
that's not easy.
Capricorn over our Pluto, and it's all about fear and how to transcend fear. And right here, you have an excellent example of somebody who transcended fear. And like he said, if you listen to the music with that kind of ear, then you realize how important it is. And it just gives us strength to do the work we have to do today.
Yes, definitely. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Santhip Ji, for discussing this with me. And as always, if you like the video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. And also, if you're interested in my Umas, Upayas, aromatherapy, Navagraha elixirs, you can go to my website, which is hindustanastrology.com, and click on the shop tab, and you'll see all of the products there. So again, thank you so much. And until next time, adios.